Good morning, friends. One of the first things we covered in yesterday's sermon concerning Matthew 7:1, where we read, "Judge not that you be not judged," is the matter of taking all Scripture in its proper context. This is incredibly important because when we quote Scripture, we often do so one verse at a time, whenever that topic happens to come up and we can apply it. For instance, when we talk about encouraging one another, we might say, well, remember, remember Proverbs 27:17, iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another. Or if we're talking about resisting sin, we might say, remember Galatians 5:16, walk by the Spirit and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh, and so on. And there's nothing wrong at all with doing that, with quoting a scripture a verse at a time, as long as we remember that those verses, those individual statements, have a larger context in which they belong. And we really ought to view them in light of that context whenever possible, especially if you happen to not be familiar with the verse that somebody's quoting. Because, for example, Galatians 5:16 that we just read, the next 9 or so verses specifically expound on what it means to walk by the Spirit. So those verses are essential to take into account as well, so that we know how to do the thing that we're talking about when we just quote the one verse. Even a verse like John 3:16, which is so familiar to us and seems so straightforward, and for the most part it is, but even that verse needs to be understood in its larger context, that whole conversation that Jesus has with Nicodemus in John chapter 3, because if we only consider the words in that one verse, in verse 16, without the rest of the conversation, we are very likely to come to the wrong conclusion based on John 3:16, that everybody thinks, well, I know that, I know what it means. Do you? Do we? Have we looked at it in its context? And obviously, as we explored yesterday, it's the same case with these words of Jesus in Matthew 7:1, judge not that you be not judged. This is not a prohibition against all forms of judging, even though that's how it's most often given as a whammy statement, when somebody is afraid of being judged or doesn't want to be judged, and they just throw it out there. But that's not what it is. It's not a prohibition against all forms of judging, rather against being judgmental in the sense of being eager to find fault and condemn, being eager to criticize and eager to see justice applied without mercy. Because as Jesus points out, if that is our heart attitude toward others, if those are the kinds of scales we're using to weigh others, then God will use those same kind of scales to weigh and judge us. And that's a scary thought indeed. So context is key. Context is crucial. And that's all I really want to say for today. So this is going to be an ultra short devotion, especially compared to the ones recently. But that's what I want to drive home today. When you talk with folks, whether they're folks inside the church or outside the church, and especially if someone's just throwing single verses out there in a gotcha manner, or just saying them quickly then moving on, well, go and explore that verse's context before you come to any particular conclusions as to how you need to respond to that individual statement. With that, I pray you have a good and godly day, and Lord willing, I'll see you soon.